Welcome everyone. It's really awesome to host a panel with so many amazing apps. Actually using Mapbox, that's how I ended up here myself as well. I built a fitness tracker called Human, so it's really cool to talk a little bit more about the challenges of building engaging applications. I have here Rachel from REI, Craig from motorcycle app Rever, and Drew from Strava, who worked on some of the really amazing heat maps that they announced a little while ago. Let's start with a brief introduction. We've all were able to read the bios on the website. So what do you want to share with the audience in 60 seconds that's not in your bio? How about kicking it off, Drew?
Sure. So at Strava, one thing we talk about a lot is our preferred activity type as an athlete. So a lot of us are runners or cyclists. I myself consider myself a kiteboarder, which is something that I learned 12 years ago growing up in Hawaii. And I guess I have more time, so at Strava, I'm an infrastructure engineer, and I've worked there for 5 years, building a lot of fun data and geo features.
How about you, Rachel?
Cool. In a similar vein, I'm a skier. That's what got me out to Boulder and what ultimately landed me in this current job with REI. I've kind of been trying to get a job for like 10 years building mountain sports apps, and I finally was able to put it together. So we make, in addition to a site called Powder Project, which is a catalog of backcountry ski lines, we have Hiking Project, Trail Run Project, Mountain Bike Project, and Mountain Project, which are guides for hiking, trail running, mountain biking, and climbing, respectively.
Greg.
Hey, so I moved out to Vail, Colorado, which is our company's currently in Eagle, Colorado, just down the street. I came out for skiing as well, and we have with Rever, we've taken our love for skiing, but then we also love to ride motorcycles, and so it's just been able to get that motorcycle riders, get them inspired about what's out there and riding and discovering other cool rides, tracking, sharing, bragging about how well and how far they ride, and so that's kind of our deal there.
Cool, great. Drew, you built a heat map visualizing 700 million activities for Strava. Can you share a little bit on the backstory there?
Sure. The backstory is basically we have this enormous platform of athletes giving us data, and we just wanted a way of displaying all of the public data just in one simple visualization so that you could learn anywhere in the world where people run or ride or do water sports or do winter snow sports. So the heat map has sort of evolved over many years, and the most recent iteration, which we launched about 6 months ago, refreshed it with a much bigger data set, and now we keep it up to date all the time.
So how did you actually come up with the early ideas to build this heat map out of all the activity?
I think the idea itself was pretty simple. It was just we want to display every single ride at once in a way that's comprehensible. And so, a single ride is pretty easy. It's just a line. But when you have, nearly 1 billion rides and runs, you sort of have to compress that data in a certain way. And there's a lot of involvement in actually just processing all that information, putting it into one map.
Cool. Greg, you're a motorcyclist yourself, right?
Yes.
And you're based out of Eagle, Colorado. How does that actually impact your work as a developer?
Very well. We have countless mountain trails, highway rides. So I'm a sport bike guy, so we're talking 1,000 cc, maybe a little bit of speed, and like to get on the interstate and head down to Denver or head way out to Grand Junction, and but then also we have a lot of off-ride riders, and so we constantly test our product in the mountains and off-roads out there, and then of course we also do snowmobiles and side-by-sides, which Colorado, there's no shortage of ways to get around, and so we have a good testing group.
Cool. We all know REI, the outdoor stores, and it's interesting to see a lot of the fitness apps actually in the past years ended up in the hands of retail. I think Under Armour buying most of the outdoor fitness users as well. How does it actually work for you being a developer on a team within a bigger company that's focused on retail primarily?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We are in a little bit of a lucky spot. REI acquired a Boulder company called Adventure Projects about 3 years ago now, and We're about a 12-person team, and largely we still work like we're a 12-person team. We don't have a ton of contact with the larger REI organization. That is starting to change, and it definitely introduces challenges in the sense that REI is primarily an online retailer. Like what they've been doing, for the past 15 years on the internet is building a shopping cart, and pivoting to being more of an experiences company has been really challenging, and it's something that we're still trying to work through, but they are aware that they can't just be a shopping cart for the future because they're ultimately going to lose on price to Amazon and Walmart and everybody else. So we are kind of a key part of this experiences business that they are trying to build up to engage people more in a community sense in the process of selling them hiking boots and camping gear and all that kind of stuff.
So coming from a mobile development background myself, I tend to think about the App Store as a pretty miserable place for most of the app developers, except for the happy few. There's this constant sort of scream for attention, especially on the App Store, to get featured and really leverage the power of Apple to build your audience. You all are working on really amazing applications that are actually hitting the top rankings of the App Store. So what is the most exciting feature in the application that you think is driving a lot of that success, but most of all, that you are excited about as a user yourself as well? How about you, Greg?
Well, currently our users very much love our challenges. We do challenges where some are based on mileage, which are just how many miles you ride on your motorcycle. Others are what we call POI based, which Mapbox has made very easy to do and very fun. We currently have a challenge for the Tour of Honor, which is, I think there's like 500 war memorials around the country. And so not only do people have a reason to get out on their bike, but now what people tell us is like, oh, now I have a new reason and a new place to go that I didn't even think of before, or even a place that's near me. And another POI challenge is this Saturday, apparently there's an Easter egg hunt in Kentucky. I had no idea, but apparently there's 65 places in Kentucky that you can earn bonus points this Saturday for 8 hours.
And are those challenges getting created by users?
I'm sorry?
Are those challenges getting created by users?
We want to get there, but right now it's mostly sponsored challenges, either sponsored by companies like Dunlop and Harley and BMW, or riding groups themselves will sponsor them.
So Rachel, what makes you go out with your own apps and really eat your own dog food, enjoy the outdoors?
Yeah, we're very much for the last few years, we've been focusing on just building up our library of trail data. We're finally at a point where we have a few 100,000 miles of trail for hiking and mountain biking. So we're at a point where we're really starting to pivot to working on engagement and figuring out how to get our users more excited about our apps. A lot of that revolves around the fact that people don't necessarily realize that we are a user-contributed content site. So if they find content missing, they tend to get frustrated rather than get excited that they have a chance to contribute and help build this database and kind of be a regional expert in their own area. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now that I'm excited about is figuring out how to make it a lot clearer that this is a database that all of our users can contribute to, and figure out how to recognize our users for the things that we do contribute, and really how to build up a good network of regional users to help us keep all of our data accurate and up to date and that kind of stuff. Specific to the app, we are going to do a lot more work with tracking. You can currently track trails in the app, but there's not really a good way to then take those trails that you recorded and convert them to actual data on our site. And we're going to do a lot of work around that, which I'm pretty excited about as well.
That's awesome. So talking a little bit more about curating that data, what kind of tools that you build internally to actually make that happen and to redact all the information that you have to keep it fresh?
Yeah, we have a ton. Every trail and photo and symbol that gets contributed to our site is reviewed by an in-house content team to make sure that it's legal and accurate and has a well-written description and all that kind of stuff. We really do aim for guidebook quality data. And then we have a whole collection of tools that let people edit content that's already been added. On the map side specifically, all kinds of tools for editing lines and drawing trails and averaging collections of user-submitted data points to figure out like where a climbing area is, for example. Our area hierarchy, all of our trails and climbs are categorized in a way that makes sense if you are someone who's really into that particular sport. And those are all created by just drawing like nested polygons on maps. We have a ton of tooling around that so that people can find trails in ways that are like intuitive to people that are actually really into the given sports.
Great. Drew, whenever I walk into the Strava office, it really feels like I'm entering the Olympic Village. How does Strava impact your own activity, being a developer on that team?
Yeah, so I've been at Strava for 5 years, and since working there, I've become like a runner and I've become a cyclist. So I participate in the platform, and I like doing that because that means that the data that I work with can be my own data, and I can understand all the features or even build features that are just built to suit my own features that I want, which is really rewarding. And then I think the office environment is pretty awesome too. You can have coworkers that have joined me on challenges such as riding 500 miles in a week during a work week, which is just a pretty cool thing to do.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you face if you work with that sort of amount of data and have all these activities flowing through the pipelines? What are some of the hardest technical challenges that you as an engineer had to solve for?
Right. So the prior implementation of the heat map was implemented on a non-scalable single machine so that running the full heat map with all of our activities at some point would have taken several months. And that would be so bad that by the time it finished, it would actually be out of date. So it would be almost a worthless pipeline. So just sort of figuring out a way to speed that up was itself a really big challenge for a company of our size. So in order to do that, I basically had to change how we store the data. The original stream data, so the raw activity GPS points from every activity, were stored as a single file. Each activity a single file in S3. And if you're familiar with S3, you might know that doing 1 billion S3 reads is very costly. I think it's on the order of thousands of dollars. And it's also really unreliable and just slow also. So we basically just aggregated all this raw data into another data store that we can sync with the real data. And then for the heat map job, we can cheaply read all this data. And I think the total size of that data is like 10 terabytes. And we can read that for just a few dollars. And so once I had this system in place, I was able to start prototyping, actually rendering heat maps with all of the data in like a really scalable way. And then I was able to make the heat map look really good because I could rerun it again and again with all of the data and sort of figure out all the little edge cases.
So there's a lot of data wrangling. You're actually pre-processing all that data in order to be able to work with that. How does that work for REI? What kind of data and how do you actually structure that data and bring it into the map?
Yeah, high level, the way our maps work is that we have a base layer that we edited the style of pretty heavily. We wanted to be really careful about what features we were showing and how they showed up so that you could see all the information that you needed in the background, but without that information overwhelming our trail data, because we do have a lot of it. And then to show our trail data, we're doing that by creating another custom tile set that just has all of our line data and photos and symbols. So rather than what we were doing before, which was making an AJAX call that pulled back all of the data that we wanted to show for a given rectangle on a map, we can just load 2 layers effectively from Mapbox, which makes things feel a lot snappier. It's really, really much better, especially for our internal content team who really can't have anything cached because they're constantly working on the newest version of all of our data.
So you're actually processing the data, you put it into your data into the Mapbox tile servers, you upload it as tiles, and then you serve it out to your customers. And that happens every day?
Yeah, we send all of our data to Mapbox every day. And before we do the uploads, we do things like interpolate the lines to make sure we're getting nice smooth curves even at the lowest zoom levels. We do a little bit of filtering so that we're only including our most popular photos. Otherwise, it's just a map of photos, which is no good. And we also have a little custom work around how Mapbox optimizes those tiles. The tiles have to be below a certain size. And so by default, the way Mapbox was simplifying our data was leaving out data that we needed to make the trails draw the way we wanted them to. So we use a custom command line tool to kind of give Mapbox hints about what zoom levels to optimize and what things to throw away at what zoom levels and things like that.
Well, Craig, what makes for you the most interesting challenge being more on the front end, working with mobile development tools and working with these types of data sets?
I'm sorry.
What makes the most interesting challenge for you being more on the front end as a developer, working with these types of data sets?
Well, with us, it's more of that we overlay data over the map tiles. We have a database of Butler maps, which are just a whole collection of maps of great roads to ride on your motorcycle. Some of them are off-road, some of them are on-road. Our issue is just the sheer volume that people are tracking. I mean, if you laid it end to end, you could visit some nearby planets with the amount of miles that people are tracking in our app. We then also try to give people suggestions. We curate data so that when you open the app and you go to look around and discover roads around you, I'm in San Francisco, which I've not really ridden a motorcycle around here before, but when I open up the app, there's going to be suggested rides. There's also going to be rides that other people have done, and also seeing what your friends have done and things like that. And so we do a lot of that work on the server side so that when the app says, I'm here, what's there to do, what's there to ride, you know, how am I going to get inspired today to get on my motorcycle? That's mostly done like with the server side, is running through all the rides that we have people tracking and sharing with us.
Great. Could you also talk a little bit more about the turn-by-turn navigation inside of the
Yeah, so that's something we're working on. We have turn-by-turn navigation, point A to point B, which, hats off to Mapbox, we could work that into our app very quickly and very easily. What we are currently working on in our challenge, and we're working with Mapbox on, is custom turn-by-turn. Because a motorcycle rider, when they see a cool ride that was done by, you know, Robbie Renner or, you know, somebody from the X Games, or some cool back road ride that their friend did, or they want to go out and experience this ride that they see posted on the app, they want the exact ride. They want a custom ride that if they planned it out to go through these exact points and these exact places, that they don't want a general navigation, which is how most of us drive our car. We just get us to where we need to go, get us efficiently, maybe avoid tolls, you know, or take the highway or whatever. They want that experience, and so they want the same experience that the person or the ride they saw. So they want to make the same turns, follow through the same little back roads, and so we're working on that. Mapbox has been a huge help in trying to make that happen.
So you talk a bit about back roads. You also briefly talked about some of these challenges, mostly for outdoor apps around offline. What are your ideas about the need for designing offline experiences, especially given the fact that there's so much connectivity, except for San Francisco, of course, the black spots that we have in the city? What are some of the unique challenges that you see around offline, taking a map offline and building the best experience around that?
Well, for us, being motorcycle, people can cover a lot of terrain, and they can cover a lot of out-of-network terrain. So for us, we work on providing maps that you can download, and so offline maps is a huge feature, again, that Mapbox helps us provide. We have adventure riders who, I mean, it's basically Indiana Jones with a motorcycle. These people go, they may be out of network for as long as a week, if not more, traveling hundreds, if not thousands of miles. One of the winners of our March challenge, it took us a week and a half to get in touch with her because she rode down to the southern tip of South America and was on her way back, and we finally got a hold of her somewhere coming up on Brazil. But offline maps are huge for, again, our adventure riders, people who are going out in the off-road, back road kind of stuff, and they can be out of touch for, you know, again, 2-3 days, a week or more. And so for us, the challenge is allowing them to download those maps into their device. And so no matter where they are, those maps, the zoom levels are available to them. And so far, we've been able to accomplish a lot of that. We're working on improving it.
Cool. Rachel, can you talk a bit more about the importance of offline for the apps that you're working on?
Yeah, this is an interesting question for us lately. Our apps do work offline. We have data packs that you download by state so that when you are using the apps, in the mountains, hiking or climbing or whatever, we're not doing any API calls to get the data. You're just getting all the data locally from these data packs. So we don't do anything explicit to cache or download map tiles. So if you happen to have looked at the area that you're going hiking in before, you will have the map tiles loaded. If not, you won't, but you do still have the most important part of the map, which is the lines of the trail and your dot on them. This is something that used to cause us a lot of angst, but we did a bunch of data collection around it last year, and it turns out that less than 10% of our users are using our apps in situations when they don't have an internet connection. So honestly, given that we are such a small team, I think our online experience is probably good enough, and we're probably going to leave it where it is for the foreseeable future. We have a lot more exciting and fun and seemingly important stuff to work on. I mean, that number is only going to go down.
There are some interesting challenges when you start mixing this with different types of devices as well, and the tracking versus the display of data. Drew, can you talk a bit more about how Strava handles offline?
Yeah, well, I think a good thing for us is that Strava is primarily about recording data, and thankfully there is no offline for GPS, so that will always work. But I think one of Strava's most important features are segments. And so a segment is basically just a fixed geographic path that different athletes can compete for the fastest times on. So it'll typically be like a hill climb, and you can see who's the fastest. And one of the major offline features that we recently implemented, I think a few years ago, was the ability to do segment tracking offline completely and even off of a mobile app. So if you're wearing some GPS watch, like a Garmin watch, you can still match your segment completely offline, and the watch will pull from Strava's API all of the segments that you have in your profile that you're interested in, so that it will match as soon as you start one of these segments and give you the time as soon as you finish, rather than when you're back and upload your activity.
Great. So thinking about sort of the transition between the mobile experience and designing the best experience for people when they're on the road versus the desktop, what are some thoughts that you have to handle as a team in terms of planning versus riding or going out and doing the preparation for a ride? What do you actually build into the dashboards for, let's say, Strava on the web and Strava on mobile? Are there typical challenges for you as a developer that you see within your teams that make a big difference? So the challenge between I'm planning, so the internal tooling, if I go on a ride, I look at my data while I'm riding. You take most of this offline. I can see these segments as well. How much of that is actually happening on the web versus mobile? And as being a user yourself, what do you use for what?
Yeah, I think mobile is sort of always trying to catch up with web feature. I think as to like before and after, I think we focus on like both of those experiences. Well, before, after, and during, we sort of focus on all three of those things, and hopefully we build features that can make sense on all three stages. Like if you are planning a route and then recording that route and following the route, and then afterwards showing that you actually did the route is like a classic example.
You and your team are primarily focused on the labs, which is sort of an internal tools or an internal experimental team within Strava. Can you talk a little bit more about the team structure and how that actually leads to new features on web or mobile?
Sure. So Strava Labs is sort of our experimental website where it's not really a team. It's basically just a bunch of people's individual personal projects that they want to polish together and put online. So one of my favorite projects that was my project is called Flyby. And so this was just computing a database from Strava activities of all the intersection of activities. And like the use case there is, you go out on a bike ride and you see someone who waves at you and they say, "Oh, hi, Drew," and you don't remember who it was or you can't see who it was. And if they're a Strava user, you can later go back and figure out who that was through Flyby, assuming that their activity was public also. And I think it's a really interesting fact, actually, that if you look at Strava data, the average activity has something on the order of 40 or 50 flybys. So we have enough density that you're almost always having these interactions. You might not know who any of those people are, or you might know them.
Is that mostly here in San Francisco or everywhere?
Oh, that's across the whole world. The average is heavily weighted by some big activities, but it's still an interesting figure.
It's interesting to go on a ride on Saturday here, especially in Marin. You'll bump into even 40 friends that you know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What is if you have to pinpoint one single source of data that your the most precious diamond that REI sort of guards, Rachel? What would be the single one thing that you care about as either a user or as a developer working with that data?
I mean, it's tough to pick one. I think our data in general is just so tailored to what you want if you're an outdoor enthusiast, and it kind of all comes together to paint that picture, if you will, to give that context. I mean, in addition to all of our trail lines and photos and that kind of stuff, we have symbols for all of our activities too, so you can know, like, oh, this spot has, there's high water on this hike in the spring here, or here's the real parking area, but if you have a high clearance car, you can go and park at this other 4x4 trailhead. So I think it really is just the combination of all this super specific, tailored outdoor data that kind of makes it the resource that it is, honestly.
And you and your team spend a lot of time tweaking and tuning the visual representation of that as well, right? Can you talk a little bit more about the tools that you use to visualize that and to get that on the screen in the best possible way?
Right. I mean, I mentioned before that we did a lot of work in Mapbox Studio on our styles to make sure that we were kind of showing all of the relevant background features, but showing them in a very subtle way so that you weren't overwhelmed by all this map data. We're always kind of trying to walk the line between having a good density of information and showing all the information we want while not making them look too complicated. We also, part of the reason why we wanted to make sure our trails were front and center is because those are also, they're styled differently based on what the trail surface is or on how difficult they are and things like that. So there really is there's a lot of data built into even just the trail lines on our map views.
So you all started working with Mapbox tools, and you had to dive in and literally sort of start from scratch, learn about the documentation. In some cases, you got the help from our teams. In other cases, especially in the case of Rever, you've been experimenting with new SDKs, and you were one of the first users of our navigation SDK as well. What are some of the things that you think that you would love to have known in hindsight if you think back about that process and the exploration and getting started with those tools? What would you tell yourself if you sort of could look back 6 months, go back in time and say, okay, let's start here instead? What are some takeaways there?
To be honest with you, as far as navigation, we didn't have a lot of issues with the implementing a navigation. We actually just kind of dropped it in.
Sounds like a commercial.
Huh? Yeah, no, that I would, not happy with everything, but there are things that, yeah. But as far as navigation, just point A to point B, we pretty much dropped it in and, used the code base, and it definitely gave our users what they were looking for. Like I said, the challenge we have now, and we're still fighting with and trying to get there, is the custom turn by turn, which is not something that really anybody does, but you're working with us on that. And again, for people riding motorcycles, it's the experience. It's the I want to experience the same ride that my cousin or my son or my dad experienced or something like that. So.
Yeah, so some of these challenges are really about building custom tools. The same goes for the types of things that REI played with. Can you explain a little bit more about the process of onboarding to our specific tools and our stack and the experience that you had as a developer? What would you tell yourself if you would go 6 months back in time?
Yeah, I mean, we also had a pretty good experience. There were a few things that were a little frustrating that I think maybe I've already touched on. One was that by default, the way that the tile sets were getting simplified was throwing away data that we needed. Another one that was kind of a bummer is that in addition to uploading a file from your watch or your phone or whatever, our users can also just draw lines on a map to make trails. And the way that that works is you kind of just, you're drawing a bunch of line segments so they meet at corners that are kind of sharp and don't really represent what the trail looks like in real life. And there's no way to make those points get connected by a curve by default with the Mapbox tools. So we're doing interpolation to put enough points in between the points to get those smooth curves. But I mean, overall, especially being able to just load all of our trail lines via a custom tile set, it's a lot easier than what we were doing before, for sure.
Great. So we already have this big countdown timer and a big red thing flashing in front of us that we're over time. I just want to do one more question. What is the most exciting project that you're working on as a developer right now that you'd like to share with the audience that's not out there yet? Drew.
So this is a project I've been working on for a while and sort of always needs improvement, but that is sort of the set of algorithms that allow multiple activities to be grouped together. So sort of when there's a spatial and temporal overlap. And that's sort of like the core of the social network aspect of Strava. Sort of these interactions of people running or riding together. And there's just so many ways to make those algorithms better and more efficient and do more things. So I'm really excited about that.
Great. Rachel.
Yeah, we're obviously not operating on the scale of data that Strava is, but we are also really trying to encourage more user check-ins and ratings and things like that so that we can get a lot better at suggesting things you might like, specifically things that are fantastic but underutilized. I think that most people are probably recreating on the top 5% of trails in the country, and if you take the 20% below that, they're still all really awesome and generally a lot less crowded. So just finding more intelligent ways to surface all that stuff for our users, I think, is going to be pretty cool.
So Craig, except for the navigation, the amazing feature that we're working on together, what else are you excited about?
Well, we're working. One of the things we're excited about is our communities arena, which is a new part, not entirely new, but we've improved it and restyled it to make it easier for people to find their groups of friends to share rides with. People do a lot of charity rides, and so they found that the communities is a great way to start a community that might do a charity ride for this event or for that event, and then that they can just simply share the rides on there, and then everybody can be like, oh, we're doing this charity ride, this is the event date, this is the meeting place. They click it, boom, and then that ride is laid over their entire event, their entire route, and they can see exactly where they're going. And we also, with the friend tracker tied in, we're trying to extrapolate that because right now it's super helpful for families and friends to keep a track on a loved one or a spouse who might be off in the back roads or on a long motorcycle trip on their own. The spouse can quickly open up the app and see where their partner is, and boom, there it is. And we're trying to add that to where, as a group, you can see the whole group. Because you always get to a point where everybody's supposed to meet up, and Dave isn't there because, no offense, Dave always took a wrong turn. And now, very quickly in the app, you can be like, oh, Dave took that left that he wasn't supposed to take. No offense to Dave's in the room. But.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was great. Thank everyone for coming. Please check out these apps. Just download them for inspiration and most of all to enjoy the outdoors yourself. There will be a great weekend ahead of us after the conference as well. And thank you for coming.
Cool. Thanks.